Dennis Dodd's latest power rankings sees a change at the top. The Dodd father has put Michigan at #1 ahead of Georgia, switching places from last week. Washington, Texas, and Oklahoma all survived on Saturday with close wins against teams they were heavily favored over. UNC, one of the biggest fallers after losing at home to Virginia. Mac Brown, Drake May and company, and the Tar Heels go from 9 to 16 in the power rankings. Let's bring in our Dennis Dodd and Danny Kanell from the Cover 3 podcast to go over Dennis's latest power rankings. So, Dennis, you joined the CBS Sports 133, putting Michigan ahead of Georgia. Take us through the thought process of leapfrogging the top 2 teams in the country.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it for a few weeks. I know Michigan hasn't played anyone, but we're now in week 9 where all these blowouts start to mean something. And in some ways, it's kind of an indictment of where the Big Ten is right now. But we've been through years when it was the Big 2 and the Little 8, now the Little 18 or whatever it's going to be. But, you know, J.J. McCarthy, to me, is a Heisman finalist. Have we forgotten what he did against TCU last year and threw for a personal high over 400 yards? He's the best quarterback in the country on third down. He's thrown 4 touchdowns on third down and 5 incompletions in converting third down. So he's really, really good in that respect. Blake Corum came back. There was such a big deal about him coming back. I don't know if Michigan needed him. He's on a pace right now to run for 900 yards, which would be below his 1,400 of last year. They could be at this point with Donovan Edwards, but they've just got great depth. Chris Jenkins on the defensive line. The differential, 278 points, and the winning differential is more than like 120 teams have scored this season. They're winning games by 5 touchdowns, which is like mid-90s Nebraska stuff or Alabama in its prime. So I've just come around on Michigan. I think they're the best team in the country.
Yeah, I'm with you, Dennis. I don't have a problem with it at all. I get, and we've talked about this when Georgia was at 1. It was more of an ode to, or a tribute to what they've done in the past. And they've been good this year. Like I can see a Georgia fan being upset by it, but Michigan has absolutely dominated everybody on their schedule. Even Rutgers all of a sudden quietly is 6-2, and that was a game that, Michigan handled them 31-7. As far as J.J. McCarthy goes, I'll take it a step further. He's not only finalist, he's the favorite right now because Michael Penix struggled this past weekend with 2 picks. He's playing better than everybody decision-making. He has the best QBR in the country. They let him get some stats because it is a stat-driven award, so it was good to see him have 4 touchdown passes against Michigan State. The only thing he's missing, and this is what you may or may not see, is that Heisman moment where it's a fourth-quarter game and you need to drive the length of the field for a win. You may not see that against Penn State until they play Penn State or against Ohio State in the game. But I think he's playing as good as anybody. You mentioned the game against TCU. He had those 2 pick sixes, but he bounced back in a big way. So Michigan, I know their fans get upset about, hey, we can only play the schedule that's in front of us. And they're right because they are absolutely manhandling everybody on their schedule.
They took care of Sparty. As DK mentioned, they will get those tougher games with Penn State and Ohio State down the road. And speaking of those 2 teams, they played just last weekend. Ohio State coming away with the victory over the Nittany Lions. Dennis, you had considered perhaps getting him into the top 5, which you did. Did you consider maybe leapfrogging them over Oklahoma? The Sooners, Longhorns, and the Huskies all did survive over the weekend.
Yeah, I didn't for a variety of reasons. I had him at number 5 because I had him leapfrogging Washington, who sleptwalked through the Arizona State game, but that's another story. I'm down on Ohio State. If not for Marvin Harrison on Saturday, I don't know if they win that game. I know Penn State couldn't move it against air. I understand the offensive concerns. Ohio State's defense is really good, but they're not as dynamic as they were in recent years. And Danny, you were talking about the Heisman. I've got Marvin Harrison Jr., or the 3rd at the top of my list this week. If he doesn't catch 11 passes for 162 yards, he was thrown to 16 times. Again, that game might be a lot closer. So I'm kind of down on Ohio State. Oklahoma is in the top 4 because they beat the team that beat the team. And I keep saying that week after week. They beat Texas, which beat Alabama. The defense is better. It didn't show it particularly against UCF, but it might be a case where Oklahoma goes undefeated, and that's going to shut out Ohio State. If you talk about Michigan, running the table, which I think we have to now, and they beat Ohio State. They're at home on November 25th. Is there a spot for Ohio State with one loss to get into the playoff like last year? I'm not sure. SEC champion, especially if it's Georgia, an undefeated SEC, if Florida State seals the deal, which it looks like they're going to go ahead and do, I don't think Ohio State can afford to lose it all.
So I actually have Ohio State outside of the top 5. I'd still leave Washington in front of them. You know, you mentioned the game they sleptwalked through. They had a pick 6 late in that game. They were losing. They were very much on the verge of losing it. Oklahoma was too, though. Oklahoma, you know, UCF had a 2-point play that, you know, they failed to hit. That could have been the difference in that game. Everybody has struggled, and if you're looking for struggles, at least you're not North Carolina today, you know, who lost to Virginia in a game that was close late. They ended up losing it. But here's where I surmise the Buckeyes. If you're upset where you're ranked, it's going to come down to one game, as it usually does. Go to Ann Arbor and beat Michigan. Then you'll solve all your problems. And I'm with you. I left unimpressed with them. Their defense was awesome, but I don't know how good Penn State's offense is. Here's the consolation prize. I think Kyle McCord can get better. He has to get more consistent. You mentioned Marvin Harrison Jr. He's been spectacular. They didn't have Travion Henderson. They didn't have Emeka Egbuka. So they didn't have 2 of their better weapons on the offensive side of the ball. So get healthy, get more consistent at quarterback. Your defense looks great. Like, now you just got to go beat Michigan, and you'll leapfrog probably everybody that you need to get into the playoff.
Dennis, what questions do you have about a Longhorn team that's held steady at 7 but now has questions at quarterback?
Well, that's the biggest question, isn't it? I mean, as we talk here in real time right now, I think the diagnosis that I just read on the crawl that he has a shoulder injury, but it's not considered season threatening, so he's going to be back at some point. But I think we can expect Quinn Ewers to be out for multiple weeks. The way he was walking around, the rumors of an AC joint, you know, we shall see from Steve Sarkisian probably at his press conference today. But I think they're in okay shape with Malik Murphy. I've seen Malik Murphy in camps when he was in high school, and he's a tremendous athlete. He's about 6'5", can throw the ball 80 yards from a standstill. I think they'll adjust the offense to him because he doesn't have the experience. And then the question becomes, does it become a competition with Arch Manning? Apparently the Manning family doesn't want Arch to play this year for whatever reason. They want that redshirt year, so we'll see about that. But regardless of what quarterback plays, Texas is in the position if they just stick to their knitting. If they don't Clemson, as it were, you know, lose to somebody they shouldn't. If they don't do it, Texas usually does. They've got Kansas State at home. They're at TCU at Iowa State, and then Texas Tech at home to finish the season. That was a rivalry game on Saturday against Houston, and Steve Sarkisian kind of let Houston back in the game with that fake field goal, which should have never been called, up 21-0 on the road. I don't know what you're trying to do. And that gave them momentum and let them back in the game, and Texas had to seal it at the end. But I don't take anything away from that. I had them right where they were, I think, since from last week. So they just got to stick to their knitting. They got to do what they're supposed to do, and they'll be in.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I think they're going to be favored in every remaining game. Their next 2 games, BYU and Kansas State, as you mentioned, those are at home, which is always a better case if you're playing a quarterback who hasn't played a lot. Malik Murphy looked awesome in the spring game. I know he didn't look great, but I'm not going to hold that against him in a situation on the road against Houston. You're thrust into the action. And here's probably what I trust the most. Steve Sarkisian's one of the better offensive minds. Great coaches build an offense around their quarterback skill set. So I think he'll put Malik Murphy in positions to succeed. But the only thing I don't know is there will be a cloud hanging over Malik Murphy. The minute he throws one interception or has too many 3-and-outs, the rumblings in Austin, because they are at home, will be, where's Arch Manning? Where's Arch Manning? So you know, the Manning family, they want him to redshirt. There's going to be an intense amount of pressure on Sark to make a move if Malik Murphy stumbles at all. I do think Sark will have the backbone to say, nope, this is our guy. Just like he did with Quinn Ewers after the spring game. He said, this is his team. I think he might have to step up in a similar fashion and say, no, this is Malik Murphy's team now until we get Quinn Ewers back. And I think Texas will be okay too. But all bets are off the table in a rematch potentially against Oklahoma. That's when I think they need Quinn Ewers back in order to win them and, you know, avenge that loss and maybe get in the playoffs.
Again, it's important to note, as Danny said there, the expectation is that OU and Texas will meet once again down the road for a chance to get to the CFP. All right, let's get to a team that wasn't ranked in Dennis Dodd's power rankings 2 weeks ago. And then last week, Mizzou gets in at 21, and now the Tigers are all the way up inside the top 15. And Dennis, you moved them up 7 spots for a 7-1 Mizzou team. What's the reasoning behind such a nice rise here for the program?
Well, number one, it's week 9, and 7-1 in the SEC means something. Number two, in the past, that South Carolina game would have been a game that Missouri lost in the past. They went in, handled their business. They only have that one loss to LSU, and boy, they kind of blew that. They were up by 15 at home over LSU, but they'd be unbeaten. But this team definitely has an identity. You're looking there at Cody Schrader, who's one of the top running backs in the SEC. Luther Burden, the third, might be the best receiver in the country right now. And I think it all starts with Brady Cook, who's a native son of Missouri, kind of a guy that were a lot of questions about at the beginning of the season. And now he's one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC. He had that big streak earlier in this season, his career 300 plus without an interception, and LSU finally got him twice, and that may have been the difference in the game. But the question becomes, look, after a bye week, Missouri goes to Georgia, and are the Tigers for real? I give them a puncher's chance based on everything I just said about them going on the road, especially without Brock Bowers. So I like Missouri's chances. I think, the obvious conclusion here is they lose to Georgia, go 10-2. I think with what they've accomplished, 10-2 in the SEC gets them consideration for a New Year's Six bowl. So this is big for Eli Drinkwitz, who hadn't had a winning season. He's clinched that already at Missouri. 17-19 in his career at Missouri. So the arrow is definitely pointing up for the entire program.
Dennis, I've given you a hard time about some of your picks there that have been too high. I'm not going to do it with this one. I tell you, this has been really impressive. You mentioned Eli Drinkwitz. Remember, he got the contract extension this offseason. I think even Missouri fans were like, what? We haven't seen a winning season yet. And you mentioned it. The LSU game could have been a win. Now, would have, could have, should have. It doesn't matter. You still lost that game. But they have a tremendous, opportunity to have a really kind of breakout season for Eli Drinkwitz. And he's already done pretty well on the recruiting trail. I'm very curious to see how they do, because remember last year they had Georgia at home on the ropes, right? That was a 4th quarter game. They potentially could have had one of the upsets of the season. Then they fell apart to kind of, put a real blemish on the season. Now they've got an opportunity coming off a bye while Florida's playing Georgia in a rivalry game to potentially get some, revenge from that game. This could be a huge season for Mizzou. So I'm with you. Brady Cook has been awesome. 15 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He's been great. I think it's been one of the stories that probably is flying under the radar in all of college football.
Great stuff, gents. You can catch Dennis Dodd's entire power rankings at CBSSports.com. You can catch DK over at the Cover 3 with Bud Elliott, Chip Patterson, and Tom Fornelli, where, if you scan that QR code, Week 8 instant reaction. Ohio State's defense dominating Penn State. We didn't even talk about Florida State, who took on Duke. They were down at the half with Riley Leonard. He got out of the game. They ended up winning big. And Bama over Tennessee. That and more in the Cover 3.